Of all the changes in education that happened in the late 1980s, probably the most significant to school managers was the introduction of delegated budgets. Schools are still coming to terms with both the problems and the opportunities of managing their own budgets. But what have the changes meant to the work of senior school staff? How, if at all, have the children benefited? And what decision-making processes are being developed? We shall be looking at two schools in contrasting situations. William Harding Primary in Aylesbury has a predominantly young staff and has been expanding in recent years, whilst Fitzallen High in Cardiff has a more mature staff and falling roles. LMS presents different challenges for each of these schools, and each has developed its own responses. William Harding School has had a head start on some of its neighbours. It was one of a number in Buckinghamshire that took part in a pilot scheme. So what lessons can be learnt from its experience?
The school opened in April 1975. It's an 8 to 12 middle school deemed primary, and I was appointed to the post permanently in 1987 when the school roll was 181 with 7 classes. Today it's 280 with 11 classes. The catchment area of the school is a mixture of local authority housing and private housing. It's about 70% council and 30% private, the private sector growing as the estate has developed and grown.
In 1988, the school became one of the first in Buckinghamshire to experience LMS.
The impact of LMS on our school has been, luckily for us, I think, a very positive one. Initially, when we were chosen as the pilot school for Aylesbury Vale, we agreed to it and took that decision that we would take part, thinking that it would be good for the school.
Taking part in the pilot scheme didn't involve any specific extra funding. The head, Graham Osman, had priority spending areas, so he began by looking for ways to enhance the budget. Lettings for adult education, the church and sporting events helped considerably, but the staff also agreed to a controversial policy on supply cover.
It was a very conscious decision between the deputy head and myself that in forward planning, if we worked at it for a year, there would be great benefits for the school. So we have done a lot of the supply cover ourselves. Also, during a period of secondment on myself, part-time, 3 days a week, we were paid supply cover, but the deputy head and I covered the essential work, and we made approximately £7,000 out of that.
The financial benefits of this arrangement are obvious, but the staff see benefits for the children also.
It is much better for the children to have a member of staff going into their classroom whom they know, whom they respect, and a member of staff who knows what is already going on within the school and has, to a certain extent, been involved in the planning of the work that the children are undertaking.
The teaching methods adopted at William Harding make it easier for teachers to cover for each other.
We've changed the teaching methods quite drastically. We're now using the building as it should be used, as a semi-open plan, and we're team teaching away from the single 8-class unit. And we found this very beneficial to the children. We found the teachers have enjoyed it very much, and it's also helped with our LMS planning.
The schools save space by not having a dining room. Teachers stay on to keep an eye on children eating lunch in the classroom. Another area for savings has been in recruitment.
Buckinghamshire has a good recruitment policy, but the price of housing has been very restrictive. So what we have done is we did advertise for senior staff, but were unable to attract the quality of person we wanted. So we have, in fact, appointed from within the staff and then appointed a younger staff underneath, which, yes, have been cheaper in terms of wages, but not at the expense of quality of teacher. That has always been the most important aspect.
The policy of saving money by teachers covering for each other and by recruiting younger staff has been criticised by colleagues in other schools.
There have been opposition to some of the things that we have done, but that is the whole beauty of LMS. LMS is about individual schools deciding their own priorities. What may be right for this school may not necessarily be right for another. We made a management decision as to how we were going to handle the supply budget. It was our right to make that decision, and for us, we have actually been proved to be right.
The savings have partly been used to provide better materials and equipment, but the school chose to put most of its surplus into the staffing budget.
The budget situation left us so that we could increase our staffing by 2 this year. One was a permanent appointment, and we increased it as an allowance to attract applications. My deputy was going on maternity leave, and to try to stop a situation with the children having 2 teachers in a year, we were able to look at the budget and take a full-time teacher on for the full year until my deputy returned. Whenever she returned, we would then be able to use her as a floating teacher, which would be good for her, good for the children and good for the school.
Since I came back in January after my maternity leave, which was just the autumn term last year, I spend quite a bit of my time actually covering for other colleagues in school, covering their classes. That may be because they are absent on illness, but on the whole it tends to be to allow those members of staff to go on courses, which is obviously improving their own classroom teaching or curriculum subject knowledge. Right. The other thing which I have to do with my time is looking at mathematics. That's my curriculum area, and at the moment we are in the process of putting together a scheme which will cover all the national curriculum that we need to be doing.
It does come up in the other part of the first profile component.
So we're not actually looking at that specific attainment target
not just,
in its own right.
No, because it comes up in the other attainment targets as well. But I just wondered if you had any... I've got some good investigation cards, but I wondered if you had any material.
Now, you started off, have you looked at the maths investigations, the GIN work that we put into the folders in attainment targets?
Yes, those are the ones that are up there, aren't they?
So you've taken some of those.
Yes, and actually there's some quite good ones there, some quite useful ones.
William Harding School caters for 21 children with special needs. By combining money for special needs from the local authority with some from the school budget, resources for all children are enhanced.
The money is actually linked together a lot of the time in that we are able to buy extra resources for language and mathematics, which some of them are actually kept within this room, but the children are free to actually come in the room and actually borrow the materials. That is both the statemented children and the mainstream children. 2 of the children do have their own computers because of their physical difficulties. For most of the time they need to use the computers, but if they're involved in practical activities or PE and games, then they don't need their computers, and the mainstream children do use them at that time, or if the children are away.
Just for you.
Teaching and welfare staff provided by special needs money are also shared by mainstream children.
The welfare assistants work with both the statemented children and with mainstream children. We like the children to actually become independent, therefore they don't work all the time in a one-to-one situation. They will work in a small group. They may take them out to do some artwork or cookery or an activity which the teacher has asked the welfare assistant to assist with.
Where finances are tight, decisions about spending priorities are crucial, and decision-making structures need to be geared to the demands of setting the budget.
The development of the staff has been very much with the development of the school. Originally, it was the deputy head and myself. Now, as the school has grown, we do have a head of upper school and a head of lower school and a head of special needs, which form the senior management team.
As you know, I've got the...
A major issue for the school is whether to continue with the extra teaching post originally created to cover the deputy's maternity leave.
Costs. And I think the most important issue that has to come out tonight is, are we going to keep Jill? And the cost effectiveness of that. And then, what other development issues do you, in your departments and other roles, think we should be looking at spending money on? But let's discuss the issue of Jill. She's here for this year on a temporary contract. Do we go to the governors and recommend that it should be made permanent? I've got my own views on it, but I'd like yours first.
She fitted in as though she'd always been here, and it just seemed a natural progression then to keep her with us for the year.
Having worked within the top part of the school and seen how well she's coped with not just the ordinary mainstream children, but with the special needs children as well, you actually wouldn't think that she was a probationer.
No. I mean, it's meant that assessment...
Once decisions have been made, these are put to the governors for approval. New relationships with the governors have also had to be developed under LMS.
To ask her, she would say she'd like
Initially, the governors were cautious, as you would expect them to be, and I think they had tremendous worries about this chequebook arriving on the desk and me disappearing with the chequebook into the blue and leaving the school in the lurch. I think it took some time to actually convince some governors that the head wasn't going to have an open chequebook. And as we developed together, we set up a small working party that met with me every month. And I was given a relatively free hand with the need to justify my decisions to the working party. And then at the Cholmondeley Governors' meeting, a full statement. But it very much has been a team attempt, but they have not restricted me on what I've done. It's changed my role as a head teacher quite enormously. When I first became a head, I taught 50% by choice and I did the paperwork at the same time. I'm very much more involved in meetings, projecting, planning, plus the fact that the school has got very much bigger than it was. I therefore don't spend as much time with the children as I used to, which I regret.
An increase in time spent on paperwork is perhaps inevitable. But at William Harding School, LMS has meant greater choice to spend in a way that benefits the children. But making those choices required the involvement and cooperation of all the staff. Difficult enough in a primary school with a young staff. But how much more difficult is it in a secondary school with a more mature staff and falling roles? Fitzallen High is a large school in the heart of Cardiff.
Fitzallen High School is a 11 to 18 school in an inner city area. There are at any one time 20 to 30 nationalities on site. In the area there is a lot of very poor housing, although the City Council and the County Council have plans which have already begun to reinvigorate South Cardiff. But it's an area which has lost in the last 30 years through high unemployment levels, poor housing and poor opportunities. Schools are about helping children to learn, and the LMS question must therefore be, how can we improve those opportunities for each youngster in the classroom, in the workshop, in the lab?
The school is improving its own environment through LMS. This central quadrangle is being developed by the children and provides a relaxing area for lunchtimes. And a rolling programme for much-needed interior decoration is well underway.
Monday morning, all being well, so I can bring the furniture back in Monday.
These improvements were made possible because, like William Harding School, Fitzallen High has been able to make considerable savings, particularly on the staffing budget. The teaching staff has been reduced by 4.
Certainly our budgets have been extremely tight, and there have been unpleasant decisions to take. But within that general scenario, we've been able to make savings on a number of cost headings because we've been in control of them. One example would be on teaching staffing. A member of staff gets promoted from this school fairly regularly, which is good. Not from my point of view, but from, I think, the member of staff's point of view and the general ethos. And therefore, it takes a term to replace very often that member of staff. And so you will make savings.
Another way of improving efficiency is by employing more support staff. Edwina Smart was recently appointed as school librarian. This releases teachers in the English department to return to the classroom.
I've tried to develop the school's 3 libraries in a more up-to-date and modern method than it had been done before. So I work cross-curricular against all the departments and with all the departments. I've introduced a whole range of new ideas into the school because it was a very formal school before this. We've introduced magazines, newspapers, and in other medias we've introduced television, satellite, and hopefully soon we'll be getting a CD-ROM player.
As well as the librarian, the budget has provided ancillary hours in catering and technology. But this is still felt to be inadequate.
We are extremely limited into what we can do because I, for example, do not have a full-time technician within the CDT area, and I do not have a technician full-time in the catering area. These are very, very urgent demands. My main concern at the moment is that a lot of time is being spent by staff preparing teaching aids and teaching equipment when staff are being paid in the region of 15,000 to 17,000 a year, and this work could well be done by a person being paid somewhere in 7,000 or 8,000 a year on a technician grade 2 salary.
Using qualified teachers to recycle desks may not be a productive use of staff, but at least it makes a saving on the cost of raw materials for woodwork lessons.
Now, if I just mark on 40 millimetres, 40 millimetres, 40 millimetres, and I cut with a saw, will they all end up 40 millimetres?
No, sir.
Why not?
The saw takes about a millimetre.
Right, it takes a couple of millimetres thickness every time, doesn't it? So we need to allow for the thickness of the saw cut.
Sorry, just disturb you for a second.
Although extra ancillary hours would be welcome in most departments, there is concern about the possible implications for spending on teachers.
Well, there is one worry that we have, and at the moment it isn't surfacing, but it's something that's there at the back of our minds, that with the market-led schools that we now have, and we're all aware of how important keeping up pupil numbers through good results are, some schools may start to lose out on the one aspect of budget that could be targeted, and that is teachers' jobs. Although it may be more difficult for us sometimes to work with limited resources, we can still work with limited resources, but if we lose the chief resource, which is a teacher in front of that class, then we are going to be in serious trouble. For myself, I suppose we could get 3 teachers for the price of myself, and I'm sure some of my colleagues would say we'd accept any one of them instead of you. But the serious point is that if a governing body, and very luckily in this school we don't have a governing body like that, we have a supportive governing body, if a governing body was to prioritise in purely an accountancy fashion, then teachers' jobs could be vulnerable, and I think that would be the most savage and worrying aspect of LMS.
We've got a large number of teachers who are experienced, and I mean, I welcome that. Experience does show in the classroom. However, on any staff, one needs a balance of youth and maturity, and it's not easy to regenerate a right balance at any one point in time. And therefore, the fact that at this point in time we've got an experienced staff does make the budgetary decisions more difficult in relation to teacher staffing.
FitzAlan has been quick to exploit ways of raising cash whilst adding to the children's learning experience.
But we were fortunate about a month or so ago, we were able under a scheme, compact scheme, to entertain some businessmen. And we had 60 people entertained to lunch in the restaurant, and the children who were our timetable for a morning session were able to prepare the food for that and present it, and then another group of children were able to come in and actually serve it to the business people, who were very impressed. We were able to generate quite a sizable profit, something in the region of about £300, which we have now been putting back into the area and have bought equipment for the catering kitchen and restaurant.
In a large school like Fitzallen High, decision-making processes are complex. So how are decisions about the budget made?
I don't believe in the model of the head who claws the budget into him or her and then operates it. It seems to me that the person who does the daily supply cover should have that budget. The person who is in charge of building fabric should have that budget. They should then properly plan the budget for the year, take it before the governing body, thrash through the policy that we're going to work on for the year, which will be linked to, well, in the case of buildings, a 5-year building plan, so that we move progressively from stage to stage and have positive things to show for our expenditure.
With technology being...
The allocation of funds to faculties has to be agreed by governors, but the process begins with some hard bargaining between the head and heads of faculty.
Whereas in technology, as you know, we have virtually an untrained person on a 12.5-hour, 13.5-hour programme, which really, although he does a lot of work and saves a lot the staff a lot of time, it goes nowhere near to meeting the full demands of the faculty. And therefore I pressure you to reconsider your priorities within the budget to meet this demand.
Well, I think the problem this year is the budget win. The budget is not going to stretch any further. And whilst we've written in 13.5 hours of technician time, I'll be fighting to retain that rather than increasing it.
Well, you see, I've got to look at it in two ways. Either I stop scrounging industry for materials in which staff have got to spend their time cutting up the materials and preparing them for use within the faculty, or I've got to have sufficient money up front to buy materials already prepared. So I've got a dilemma.
Yeah. Let me pose a possible way out. If I reduce the staffing in your faculty, the teaching staffing, that would free up a lot of money, and money at which I could then appoint a full-time technician. Would that be an acceptable path?
No, it wouldn't, because on my analysis of the departmental demands at the moment, I need all my staff to deliver the programme that we have in school within the school curriculum. And therefore, we're going to have to reduce the school curriculum within the technology area if I don't have the staff to deliver the teaching commitment.
Well, that wouldn't be my reading of the teacher periods we need and the teacher staffing that we've actually got. There is some flexibility there.
Well, obviously, Mr. Headmaster, you've got figures that are not available to me at this time, right? If you feel that that is true, then I would say I am not prepared to see a £15,000, £16,000 a year member of staff do the work that a £7,000 or £8,000 a year technician could do.
I don't think a head of department or a head of faculty in the school would say he or she has got enough. And if they did say that, I'd actually be very worried.
Although LMS puts difficult financial decisions at the forefront, as with any new initiative, it's important not to lose sight of the main objectives.
The greatest thing about it, it's given flexibility and local decision-making. And for students at Fitzallen, who need every opportunity that we can muster for them, that's got to be good news.
I think one of the most important issues, as far as we as a school are concerned here, is that LMS is not about money. LMS is about children and bending the budget to meet their needs in the best way we can here.